Teachers, what is the most NSFW thing have you done in your classroom? I kid you not. Last week a kid lit up a joint in a classroom. 7th grade. I'm a student, but in my 7th grade English class my teacher's boob fell out of her dress when she bent to pick something up. My father is a history teacher at a high school in the city. Once a particularly churlish student, who sat in the front row, was blatantly and shamelessly on his phone in the middle of class. Naturally, my father tells him to hand over the phone. Surprisingly, the kid gives it up without a fight. However, the kid quickly pulls another phone out of his pocket. I have 2 phones. The kid sneers. He points to the phone in his hand. This one is for business. He points to the phone in my father's hand. That one is for pleasure. Well then, my father says, that explains why this one is on vibrate. To this day my dad is surprised that he didn't lose his job right then and there. In 9th grade I ducked my teacher's daughter. My teacher called me a man whore in front of my whole class. My teacher was a woman. Teaching a science class about goats and sheep. To show the kids, middle schoolers and high schoolers, the animals up close, we planned on going to a livestock auction. To prep them for the auction, I told them to not point or raise their hands, because it was an actual auction and they might bid on the animal accidentally. For the respect of the community and business, they shouldn't do anything that looked like they were bidding. Then the questions came. What if we bid? Who would have to pay for it? What if I raise my hand to ask you a question? What if I think the animal is cute and bid on it? One kid wouldn't let it go. So I said, jokingly, if you bid on any of the animals, I'll put you up for auction. Only African American kid in the class. Didn't get fired. Felt awful. TLDR accidentally told an African American kid I was going to auction him off. Edit. Thanks for the gold. Math teacher got mad after a kid made a smart aleck remark. Asked him to drop his pants in front of the whole class to prove how big his balls were. He was fired. Never found out the size of that kid's balls. Okay, I'm not proud of this, but here we go. It was my first year teaching high school English to a bunch of thugs. I was only a few years older than some of them. Near the end of class 2 guys are arguing loudly and I tell them to knock it off. They ask me to settle their argument for them. This kid, let's call him Greg, says, Mr. Canohead, if some guy puts a gun to your head and tells you to give him a blowjob, you'd have to do it, right, Greg? I say, that's not a conversation to have during class. The whole class is listening intently now. Well, says Greg, if someone put a gun to my head and told me to give him a blowjob, I'd do it. Well Greg, I said, I'll remember that the next time I have a gun. The class erupts in laughter. Somehow I don't get fired. Not a teacher, but in training. I was in placement within a primary school and a little kid hid himself. I felt really bad for him and went to get a teacher without others finding out. But this kid started screaming that someone had it under his desk. I then realized he had scooped it out and threw it under his desk, and squishing it under his shoe for authenticity. Anyway, I then had to escort a whole class out of a classroom and tell the real story to a teacher, which suspended the child for 2 days. Not a teacher, but this happened when I was in high school. About 35 years ago, my English teacher was the hot teacher in the school. One day, she's sitting at her desk and I had a question to ask. Raised my hand, went to her desk, and from where she was sitting and I was standing in the dress she was wearing, could see a good deal down her top. I said, whoa, look at all those freckles, and went on to my question without missing a beat. Fast forward to the end of the school year as we are taking our final exams and she walks over to my desk, slowly leans with over so I could get a good look and whispers, I've not worn this dress since you commented on all my freckles. Pause. Now it's your turn to blush. She smiles and walks away. Students were using perfume in water pistols. Teacher got sprayed. She stabbed student with pencil. Student got in trouble. Good times 1960. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but here it goes. Sometimes after the droves of 14 and 15-year-olds shuffle back to their respective homes for the day, I take my shoes off and walk around the building in my socks. I was a marching band instructor, just in the summer for band camp. One of the kids was eating a bag of Skittles during a break and she asked me, "Do you want to taste my rainbow?" Without thinking, I blurted out, "Not until you're 18. I wasn't fired. Well, I sexually harassed my entire class. We were discussing captcha in regards to AI versus human intelligence and I made the mistake of using a captcha with a D. Flash forward to the middle of class where I'm asking one of my students, "Jared, you've seen many Ds before, but never this D. How do you know it's a D? Does it have some kind of D-ness? What makes a D a D, etc." At this point most of the class is laughing. Jared is very confused. And I'm just hating myself. Lesson learned. Do not discuss the D or its D-ness with undergraduates. When I was in 8th grade, the class clown thought he was untouchable. He was a man among boys. I believe he was held back a year, taller than just about anybody, and growing in his facial hair. He was always doing whatever he wanted, throwing food at lunch, skipping class and just about anything that he felt would get a reaction. All the girls loved him too. They thought he was the hottest thing this side of the sun. So they usually let him get away with saying or doing things most of us couldn't. One day, I guess all of that got to his head, because he was flirting with a group of girls in the back of the class, and decided whipping out his D was a good idea. But not only did he whip it out, he put it on the kid's shoulder in front of him and showed it off to the girls around him. He got in trouble because little Susie got scared by the anaconda and screamed. Everyone turned around and the classroom erupted with all kinds of reactions. Best I remember were Mrs. French letting out an "oh my god" and the kid who had D shoulder screaming like a little girl. TLDR. Class clown takes a group of girls to D-town. One of my teachers has an awesome ass. Like really nice. She wears tight pants and a thong most days. It's pretty ducking obvious. My colleague managed to get some very old potassium on his skin. It bore a hole through his hand as if he'd had his hand under a 5mm drill bit. Never mind, not safe for work, not safe for life. Not a teacher, but my honors pre-calculus teacher said good pre-calc teachers are just lube for the ass raping you will receive in college calc. I was looking at porn on Tumblr last year. My 7th grade English teacher, who was in her first year, never had control of her classroom. A couple weeks before the end of the year, our class was arguing with her about something and she screamed, "Duck you all. Never saw MRS. Wallace again. Edit. This was in 2005 in Iowa. Working as a classroom TA in a primary school, the teacher was talking recycling and composting. She drew an apple core on the whiteboard, only it looked exactly like a V. In a fit of giggles I had to leave the room to compose myself. My buddy once took me to some sketchy house to buy some weed and there is an elementary school teacher in the living room shooting heroin. On her lunch break, she finishes, high as duck, grabs her lunch off the kitchen table, and says, "Oh duck, my lunch break is almost over. Time to get back to teaching kids." She laughs, walks out the back door, and my buddy asks the guy we were meeting if she really is a school teacher. The guy, also ducked up from slamming dope, says, "Yeah, she teaches little elementary kids in it. What the duck?" This wasn't me, but some kid was caught jacking it in Spanish class and was repeatedly told to stop, but continued to until he was switched to study hall. We once convinced a substitute teacher that The Warriors was a remake of West Side Story and that we had been instructed to watch it for theater class. We were 14. Best lesson ever. One time I stood on a chair to reach a top shelf rather than using a stepladder. When I was in high school, everyone had suspicions that this one teacher was gay. During one class he was opening files from his laptop and they were being projected onto the overhead. Accidentally opened a folder of naked photos of himself and another man. Entire class of grade 10 saw. Safe to say all suspicions were confirmed. According to my friends, in the 8th grade our hot-ass history teacher wore a dress with no underwear and sat with her legs open enough for my friends to see everything. I once climbed out of the window to pick some cherries, shared them with the students. I was teaching 5, 7, 8-years beginning woodworking at a private school and we were painting our projects. We were in a room alone and I was a 35-year male. A young girl who was wearing a denim shorts and skirt set got paint all over her skirt. I caught myself with my hand under her skirt trying to wash the paint off with a wet cloth and thought, what would anyone think if they walked in on this scene? I let her clean off the paint as best she could and finished the class. It scared the hell out of me. I used to sub at a couple of high schools. If I had some downtime when the kids were taking a test, I'd grab the roster and start looking up the kids' Twitters. It always amazed me how stupid kids are with social media. Pictures of them doing drugs, drinking, talking it about teachers, gossiping about other students. Finding the I hate this arsehole or we have the hot sub tweets were always the highlight of my day. I teach college English. The focus of my class this semester was rhetoric, and my personal research interest is rhetoric of the body, and I brought in some body related art. This included, among other things, this, which was on the same screen as the previous piece, and this. Please note that these images were accompanied with discussion and put into the context of the class. They weren't just put up on the screen for no reason. Basically, we talked about the argument each image presented and how it made use of ethos, pathos, and or logos. I also found it very interesting that one of the guys in the class was like, wow, I had no idea that these were even different at all. That alone made the whole thing worthwhile. It's so important that people know that bodies come in all shapes and sizes. I also once gave one of my own presentations that I was due to give at a conference the next week to one of my classes. It was about self-injury as rhetorical and included several images of self-injured bodies. This was also accompanied with discussion and I made sure to let everyone know what the content was and they were free to leave if they felt uncomfortable. Not a teacher, but when I was a high school senior I had a homeroom teacher in her early 20s. She was also an NFL cheerleader. Very hot. She showed me how she could fit her fist in her mouth. When she was done she looked at me and said she probably shouldn't have done that. I agreed but said thank you. Not a teacher, but this happened to my teachers. There was two teachers who were married and were working at the same school. They also had rooms next to each other with a small storage room between them. In there they had a whole kitchen, shelves with glassware, a TV and most importantly, a couch, and every so often they would meet there and have a six during lunch. The school found out and they were both forced to quit. They moved to a different town and got new jobs at different schools. I was sitting next to a kid one day in 8th grade and he called my name. I looked over and he had whipped his D out and was staring at me. Kid's a duckin' weird dude. Not me, but my 9th grade religion teacher had sex with another freshman. I've told a few lads that I'm banging their mums. It's good for taking them down a few notches and back to focusing on their work. My science teacher freshman year had the best way to get students to not text in class. He gave a student a not in use phone before class and told him to pretend he was texting halfway through class. He proceeded to walk towards the student and request the phone from him. The student pretends to put up a fight but eventually gives the teacher the phone. The class was on the second story, was an outside school, and the teacher started to walk to the door and throw the phone off the second story. The student, pretending, started to freak out, but all the other students' faces were all priceless. None of the students ever texted in class again. On my last day of student teaching I agreed to play Cards Against Humanity with some of the students. When it was my turn to judge, instead of putting in relevant white cards the students put in the most vulgar cards they had. Hearing the student teacher read cards like two midgets sitting in a box, getting your D stuck in a Chinese finger trap with another D, and Moses gargling Jesus balls while Buddha and Shiva penetrate his divine holes really made the students crack up. Not me, but my 10th grade biology teacher was answering a question from a student who asked, can another animal impregnate a human? He replied, I'm sure we've all been in that situation. Click one wrong link on the internet and whoa, what is she doing with that horse? But no, that is not possible. I am very scared of wasps. My students knew this. A wasp flew in my classroom. I left the classroom and shut the door behind me, put my foot down so they couldn't open it, and told them they weren't allowed out till they killed the wasp. They killed the wasp and I later realized how I shouldn't trap 25 students in a room with a wasp. SRO saw me and just laughed. I never got in trouble. Not a teacher, but have a worthwhile story. 12th ducking grade. This kid was beating his D in the back of the class during Romeo and Juliet. No one noticed until the girl in front of him had to hand the class walk to him needed for the day. To clarify, the seating arrangement for the class was diagonal. The kid had the very last seat of the row that was tucked away in the corner, which is why no one noticed until the paperwork was being handed out. Everyone in the class started roaring in laughter when we all noticed it. The principal, the assistant principal, and the state trooper had to come up to remove him. Had a class of 6 retesters. The retest results came back in early December and they had all passed. Since I knew I wouldn't have them back in my class after Christmas break, I thought duck it and decided to culture them by showing Pulp Fiction over the course of 3 days if they promised not to say a word to the administration. The only part I skipped was the actual raping in the abuse scene. Got away with it clean. Had a substitute teacher and wrote his name Mr. Whore, pronounced whore, on the whiteboard. He opened with, "Yes gentlemen, I know what you're thinking and you're correct. I'm a whore. My mother was a whore. My father was a whore and even my sister." Talk about engaging the class from the get-go. A friend was teaching a class of junior school kids about the Victorians and got them to Google Prince Albert. True story. Sorry, not a teacher but as a student in Econ Policy during junior year. There was a senior that was repeating the class with the same teacher. They obviously spent the entire past year making fun of each other because the jokes, insults, banter between them started from day one. One day the senior finds a pair of tighty whities near his desk. They probably fell out of some jock's gym bag. The senior picks them up, makes a WTF comment, then asks the teacher what you getting all naked in class for. Teacher pauses for a moment, then starts to smirk, grin and replies with, "Your mom stopped by during break to help work on your grade." Well, I banged my wife in my classroom after hours one night. Our Wi-Fi went out and we were both in school online as well. And it was a due day for the week. So we drove 2 minutes to my classroom and she asked me to rub her shoulders while she typed. And the rest really doesn't need explaining as to how it all went down. Also, I habitually confiscated cigarettes from kids and smoked them myself. Kids were watching YouTube videos in class and I recommended watching Shake That Bear. Seconds later I realized what I've done. One time I heard this buzzing sound in class. I get up and see this girl using hair clippers on the back of some guy's neck. I told them to shut that crap off and went back to my seat. 10 minutes later I hear the clippers again and immediately yell, "Are you ducking serious?" I thought I was fired after that. I'm not sure how I didn't get fired. I'm a music teacher and in the middle of rehearsal, high school ensemble, a male student is acting up. I stopped the rehearsal and addressed his conductor and he said, "At least I can get a date Friday night," and stupid first year teacher me responded immediately, "Your right hand doesn't count." I have no clue how I did not get fired. That kid says I'm one of his favorite teachers though. There was this juggalo in my freshman math class that was a real arsehole to everyone. The teacher was the football coach. The juggalo kid was saying some real nasty stuff to this sweet quiet girl and we all told him to stop but he didn't. The coach got up and told him that he better knock it off or there were gonna be problems. The juggalo kid stood up on his seat and yelled, "What the duck are you gonna do, old man?" Coach went over, grabbed him by the front of his shirt and lifted him up and put his back against the wall. I don't know what he said exactly, but when he put the kid down, the kid said he was gonna get coach fired. I still remember the coach slowly turning around and saying, "I have taught here for over 30 years. I have led this school to many victories. They love me. You are a little asshole who has no respect for anybody and will never amount to anything." Who do you think they will believe? This happened years ago so it's a little hazy, but that's basically how it went. He was also the teacher who fought to advance my really good stoner friend to the next math level. My friend would only show up about half the time and never turn in homework. But coach told the administrators that my friend wasn't dumb, just not challenged. It would be a waste of all their time to hold him back to take a course he already mastered. They gave my friend the final and he passed with a high B. I wish more teachers were like this. That I've ever done? Nothing too NSFW, but there have been too many cringe-worthy moments to recall. Totally got busted staring down a student's shirt one time, and there was no way to explain that I wasn't perving. I was returning papers and my mind had gone blank as to her name. I was looking at the paper on her desk that had her name. which she shifted right under her boob just as I was looking at it. I mean, I was really trying to get a good look, craning my neck and everything. Didn't even try to explain. Girl was very cute, and there was no way she was going to believe me. Plus, I didn't want to admit that I couldn't remember her name. TLDR, couldn't remember girl's name, stared at tits instead. My math teacher freshman year, senior, currently, was a cool dude. I used to go to class 15 minutes early, coming back from lunch, and listen to Pantera and Judas Priest with him and we'd talk a little. One day, some girl flipped him off, and he replied with "put your shower toy away." He was fired. When I was in 8th grade, the class clown named Jason was being a class clown. My teacher Mr. Rybzik told him to knock it off or he'll get hit. Jason giggles like a little girl and sheepishly tells Mr. Rybzik, "You can't hit me because you're my teacher." Then he giggles a bit more. The class was intrigued. Rybzik says, "You know what, Jason? You're right, I'm an adult and I'm your teacher, which means that by rule that means that I can't hit you. But that doesn't mean that Reginald can't." My teacher told Reginald to hit Jason, which he did. A few good punches on his arm. Reginald sat right behind Jason. He was also the biggest kid in the class, over 6 feet, and he could dunk. Hearing Jason scream was funny to the entire class and we all laughed and chuckled at his goof up. I was a new student at my high school in grade 10. Beginning of the year assembly is going and the grades are brought in by year, starting with the 9s. Every grade is given a quick speech on responsibility and it like that. Time for the 10s. The middle-aged Vietnamese science teacher walks up on front of the school and it went something like this. Grade 10 is a confusing time. You're all bags of emotion and hormones. It doesn't really matter what you do this year because it doesn't affect a thing in your life. So have fun, make friends and be safe. The birds and the bees are pretty important around your age. But if you see a bird having sex with a bee, you're probably having a bad acid trip and should talk to your dealer. Needless to say, the other speeches weren't as good. Had a professor in college who was only like 28 and had her pants rip when she bent over to pick up a marker, revealing her whole cooch to the class. I've been whacking to that mental image for 4 years now. I was a volunteer basketball coach for a junior high school and a kid threw a basketball at me and nailed me right in the balls. It hurt so bad. Without thinking, I whipped the ball right back at his head and knocked him out. Then I quit.